Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Rebecca Brandstetter, and I am your hostess of Coffee Break School Psychology. And I'm thrilled to announce that we are going to be talking about one of my favorite topics of all time. Can't wait to geek out with you, Dr. Paula Gill-Lopez. So I found Dr. Paula, hello, through NASP, National Association of School Psychologists. And then we happened to be on a Zoom call together, and we realized kindred spirits. So, Paula, may I kick it off to you to talk a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how come self-care for school psychologists is become your area of research interest?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So I direct the school psychology program at Fairfield U, and I've been there since, and I started when I was 12. So I've been there a long time. I started in 1994, and I was a one-person program at the time. And now I have two colleagues, which is great. So I have built the program over the last, coming up on 30 years. And, I've done everything according to, we're NASP approved, and I've done everything according to the training standards and all of that. And I'm also a prepare trainer. And my interest in self-care actually came from care for the caregiver, from crisis, because when I was a school psychologist in Richmond, California, Richmond, if you know anything about Richmond, it's Oakland's poorer sister city, kind of. And so we had a lot of gang violence at the time. I think there isn't as much now, which is great. But that was something that we did well. I don't know that we did school psych that well, but we definitely did crisis and crisis response well. And so that's where I entered into my interest in caring for the caregiver. And actually one day while I was doing a prepare training, I had an alum come up to me, because I do it every other year for my students, and I invite alum, and he said, while you were talking about and defining trauma and crisis, he came up to me during the break and he said, I realized my whole staff is in crisis and they're all traumatized. And this was before COVID. This was like, I don't know, like 2015. And I had a crisis of conscience at the time. And I was just thinking about, am I setting people up? I try to do everything that I can to equip the students and be prepared so that they have what they need. But that really hit me hard. And I had been getting emails over the years from students who were in the field saying, you didn't tell me it was going to be like this. And, this is hard. So flashback to 2010, I'm talking about 2015, flashback to 2010, 2008, actually, I attended my first mindfulness workshop. And that was at Georgetown University. It was called Hearts and Minds. And I had been interested in mindfulness when I was at Berkeley. I did some biofeedback when I was in my graduate program. And I thought that was really cool. So I was kind of drawn to this. And after that conference, I was trained with John Kabat-Zinn in MBSR, mindfulness based stress reduction training, and some other mindful schools, and which is also in Oakland. And I just started feeling better myself, because I was a mother of young kids, and I was kind of falling apart and taking Lexapro, and I have ADHD, and I started to get panic attacks. So I started doing mindfulness, and I found that it was really helping me. So fast forward again to 2015, I started thinking, if it helps me, maybe it'll help my students. So I started kind of infusing it into before class, and during my practicum classes where they learn group process, I teach them about it and we do it. And I started getting really good feedback from students. Then I had some people in the field who found that I knew mindfulness, and they wanted me to come in and teach them how to do mindfulness with kids. And I said, whoa, Nilly, I said, I will do that, but that's workshop 3. Workshop 1 is self-care for the school psychologists and the school professionals. Workshop 2 is mindfulness as self-care. And then if you want it, but you're not going to need it, because if you get workshop 1 and 2 and you do it, the kids will feel it. The kids will get it literally parasympathetic nervous system to parasympathetic nervous system. They will self-regulate according to the calm, self-regulated presence of the adults, right? So I started doing that, and I was, all over the state, and I started collecting data. And so that's where I got my data from my in-service school psychologists. And so I have the data, and I started doing it more and more intentionally for the students. And I am finding that, and that was pre-COVID. And then since COVID, everybody, like tomorrow, I'm doing it for Bridgeport nurses. I'm doing a workshop for Bridgeport nurses. I did for Westport nurses. And then in 2 weeks for Newtown nurses. So it's the zeitgeist is right. And that I'm very happy about, because I designed my workshops according to a system change model. So very deliberately, ADKAR, I don't know if you're familiar with ADKAR, but ADKAR is raise awareness that a change is needed. And I was doing that before COVID, but after COVID, I got a lot of help from COVID. The second one is create a desire to change, an incentive to change, and then give people the knowledge to change, and then the skills, the ability to change, and then reinforce that change. So I built my workshops around that, and then my courses and the program really around that change, because school psychologists are wonderful, and they're lifesavers and they're life givers, but they are notoriously bad at taking care of themselves. I mean, that. And
I'm putting my hand up for that.
Yeah.
Everything you're saying is super resonating with me. First, fun fact, she and I both went to Cal, not at the same time. She's wearing her Cal colors. And I was like, oh, we were Berkeley buddies. She's like, how about Cal pals? So I know all these areas in the Bay Area you're speaking of, and I know the need, and I know how doctors make the worst patients. Okay. Sometimes I'm putting my hands up for that. That's one of the reasons I started a Thriving School Psychologist, because of that systematic change of when we thrive, our kids thrive. Exactly. So what I would really love from you, school psychologists out there are probably all collectively nodding their heads. Yes, mindfulness. Yes, self-care. Yes, starting with myself and then teaching my students. But I think sometimes we can get so in the weeds as school psychs. We show up and the to-do list explodes with baby to-do lists, and we can just table our self-care all day long. It's 2:00, we haven't eaten, and you find a gross granola bar and you shove it in your face. And that's the advice we would never give a teacher, a fellow colleague, a student, right? Just, overwork, until you burn out and collapse. And a lot of school psychologists run that path. So as you know, I've built my whole Thriving School Psych Collective around avoiding burnout traps. And I think that self-care has been one of those things that's become hashtagized. I don't know if that's a word, which is like, oh, hashtag self-care.
It is
and it's
now.
Something done off the job. And I find school psychs need on the job. What do I do in the moment when the stress is happening? So you come prepared, of course, because you're a school psychologist and you love data, and you're from our illustrious alma mater about being scientists and practitioners. What are 3 things that school psychologists out there listening, and indeed any educators, special educators, parents, to sort of infuse self-care in the day? What does the research guide us on how to care for the caregiver?
Okay, so I guess the 3 things that I would say, and these are these are not the 4 things that I said that I was going to say before, but and this is something that has evolved. My thinking has evolved with my research, with my feedback, with my students giving me that feedback. And I would say that what we have to do is change our mindsets. And that's number one. And we can literally, I'll say, step back. Self-care has everything to do with the brain, everything to do with the brain. And I talk about 3 types of self-care. The first type is temporary self-care. It's not, it's something where we have these feel-good hormones that are released when we're doing something like, you know, having dinner with a friend or going for a walk, or, you know, so the self-care is we're doing this activity, but when it's over, the endorphins or the oxytocin that's released while we're doing it, it subsides, but it still feels good in the moment, right? And it's coming from the brain. So the second kind is more of a mindfulness infused self-care, where what you're doing when you practice mindfulness is actually permanently changing the structure of the brain to be more self-regulated and more focused. So those are the 2 main, there's so many different outcomes from practicing mindfulness, but the 2 most common are better focused attention and better self-regulation. And so that means that we can better be with whatever's happening in the moment. And I'll just say from my own experience, I can only talk from my own experience, and that's why I really promote this. And I'll just give you an example. In July 13th, 2016, my daughter was working and living in Peru. And my husband and I got a call from her housemate, and she had been hit by a bus in Peru. And so needless to say, we were in Peru the next day, you know, less than 24 hours. We were there. She was in a coma for 6 days. And we were there for a month. She is great. She is a living, breathing, walking, talking miracle. She owns her house in Milford on the beach. She's great. But we didn't know that while we were there. And, you know, I had to deal with doctors and neurologists and surgeons in Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish, you know. So long story short, we get back home, you know, everything went beautifully. She is recovered. But about 2 months after that event, you know, I was talking to my husband, who was a wreck the whole time. He was like up and down, and I was at baseline the whole time. I was able to make decisions. I was able to focus and hold on to the most positive, minute things that were happening. And I look back and I thought, the only reason I was able to do that was because of my mindfulness training. The highs, I got to the highs because I was really looking for them, but I never got to the lows. I just stayed at baseline. I was with whatever was happening without judgment, and I was able to manage that. And that happened not because I practiced mindfulness while I was in Peru. That happened because of all my practice before that. And that was the permanent changes that happened in my brain that allowed me. So I would say to the school psychologists in the COVID schools, you know, in our COVID time, this is the season that we're in, that would help. Right, that would help to stay at baseline and not be, you know, in the depths of despair every day when you go in. So that's the second type of self-care that has to do with the brain. The third type, and this is informed by, you know, different researchers, but Rick Hansen talks a lot about this. And this is where you are in the moment, but you also are scanning the world for the positives. That's what we do when we practice gratitude, right? We're looking for things that we're grateful for. So we can actually change our brains, because we are, you know, our mammalian brains, which is our amygdala, fight, flight, or freeze, that got us to where we are, evolved to where we are, and survived because we would scan the world for danger. We could get eaten. We had to compete for food, for land, for mates, right? So we are inclined to the negative, but we can counteract that by scanning the world for the positive. And that is a type of mindfulness, but pure mindfulness wouldn't have us like holding on to the positive. It would have us staying at baseline. But if we hold on to the positive and we look through gratitude or through taking in through our five senses when we go for a walk and smelling the air and just seeing the sun and the blue sky or whatever is there, and just really soak up that positive. The same with savoring the good. Like whatever you're doing, like in this situation, I'm excited because I get to talk about something I love. So I'm like really savoring this. And so what that does is that changes our brain as well, so that we are leaning away from the negative as we are built, we're designed that way. And you can lean and be more inclined to the positive if you practice that way. Right.
I love those distinctions. And I love Dr. Rick Hanson's quote that the brain is like
Yes.
Velcro for negative and Teflon for positive. And there's a lot of stress as a school psychologist. And so when you can Teflon some positive on the end of the day, it's just really helpful. And I love how you have made it into 3 different flavors of self-care, as you will, because so often self-care is seen as the bubble bath after work, but there's also a mindset involved. Right? If you're in that bubble bath, beating yourself up for not getting to all your assessments or not being perfect enough or not getting to it or messing up that meeting or, missing, something that you should have done in an assessment, that's not truly self-care. And then I love the scanning for positivity. Is there any other pro tip you want to leave our listeners with, some parting words of wisdom? I think right there, those 3 different flavors of self-care we can really wrap our brains around and do in our daily lives. What else would you offer up the school psychologist listening right now?
Okay. And I just want to say that those 3 things, like you practice them and then they work for you. Like they give you more bang for the buck. Then there's nothing wrong with a bubble bath, but while you're in the bubble bath, smell it and just really enjoy it so you can revisit it later when you're right about to go into a contentious PPT, right? That feeling of just being relaxed. But I have 4 things, and it's in an acronym of RISE. And these are the things that I have learned from my students as well as my in-service workshop participants, that effective self-care requires first the recognition that self-care is not selfish. In the data that I collect, overwhelmingly, like 99.9% of the participants say their biggest takeaway is that self-care is not selfish. Hello. So it's a quality of life imperative. So whatever that means to you, right? The second is to develop an intention to maintain that mindset that you talked about, a self-care mindset. So create these self-care habits so it becomes automatic. And that happens through replication, that repetition. You have to do it, right? You really have to do it. The third thing is developing that self-awareness to determine what you need in any one moment. It could be, I've had to go to the bathroom for the last 3 hours. And that's why I'm doing the potty dance and I didn't even realize it, So that's self-awareness, or I need a drink of water, or I really need that whatever kind of granola bar I can find on my desk. I need that, right? Or a piece of dark chocolate or whatever that is. And then the last thing is really experiencing those self-care practices mindfully with whole body focused attention so that you can burn those new neural pathways of positivity as well as peace, right? So that's RISE: recognize, intention, self-awareness, and experience.
Oh, I love me a good acronym. I'm going to cross stitch that on a pillow, use it myself. I love your origin story of how you came to self-care, and I'm really resonating with you. And I also love how ultimately we teach what we need to learn sometimes. And when you're teaching, there's a double down effect, I think. when you take care of yourself, it's not selfish. It actually makes you a better school psychologist because
Absolutely.
you're actually modeling for kids self-care, modeling for parents how to be mindful,
Yes.
present. And so there's a double down effect. And I think you could call it a ripple effect too, is that when you thrive, when you're centered, when you're doing well, when you have wellness, then all the folks that you work with can experience that along with you. And then you're
Yes.
really equipped to teach it. I always say, like, it's really hard to teach a kid to ride a bicycle if you don't know how to ride a bicycle. Like,
Right.
I guess get on the bars and balance, but then right foot, but then if you haven't done it yourself, it's a lot
Right.
harder to teach. So these have been really great, wonderful. I love the research. I love the practical tips that you've given. And I want to direct our listeners to a resource for you. So you can go to thrivingschoolpsych.com/Paula to grab a free download. Can you share out what is in this magnificent download for our school psychs out there listening who want to capture the juicy goodness that you've just shared, beyond just watching this video, but maybe even infuse it in their schools and in their lives?
Yes, absolutely. The one that I just did for NASP, for the Ask the Expert series, that's where I talk about the 3 types of self-care, with the temporary and then the mindfulness and then the positive mindfulness. So that's described in there, and as well as some of my research results, and then some tips really for how do you develop that habit? How do you develop a culture of self-care, especially in the crazy educational landscape that we have today? And it's really do it. And whatever that means, it's one size does not fit all. And that's why you have to have that self-awareness that what do you need? But you can also, like a faculty meeting, do a moment of mindfulness. When I started in 2008, mindfulness was nowhere to be found. Now it's everywhere. You can go on YouTube, 1 minute mindfulness, start off, I don't know if you want to do a PPT meeting, but a faculty meeting or counseling with kids, a group, just start off, just do it. And then it becomes a habit. One of the things that I did in between my workshops was send weekly self-care reminders. And some of my students have taken that on to do a weekly self-care reminder. Rick Hansen has just one thing. He's got this great book. It's 52. So one a week, just get something and try it out. But because you have to do it to reap the benefits. So
We are
that's what I would say.
so lucky. We're so lucky that we had you here. We got to ask the expert ourselves, and Coffee Break School Psych is so pleased to have you here. Head over to thrivingschoolpsych.com/Paula to grab that wonderful handout. We really appreciate your time. And for me, geeking out with other school psychologists is my self-care. So thank you for joining us, and we really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Rebecca.